Hello everyone, and thank you for joining this panel session on the co-creation methods. Co-creation methods may not be known to all of you, but these are the methods that supported the DISCE project as a whole. To discuss this today, I have the pleasure to be speaking to Birgitta Persson. Birgitta Persson is the former Secretary General of Trans-Europals. Trans-Europals is the organization I am the current Managing Director of, and she is the co-founder of Olivearte Cultural Agency. On the other side, Jonathan. Jonathan is a lecturer in culture, medias and creative industries at King's College London, and both Birgitta and Jonathan have used co-creation methodologies in their work throughout DISCE. So let me start with you, Birgitta. Bottom-up approaches, peer-to-peer learning, participatory governance. Co-creation has been at the origin and remains at the very core of Trans-Europals methods. It is also a widespread practice in the independent arts and culture sector that you and I know really well. Can you please describe what co-creation within DISCE has involved for you in particular? And could you say, from your long experience of the sector and your experience running many of the co-creation sessions during the DISCE project, why you believe co-creation methods are so important and what they have brought to the project?
Absolutely, that would be my pleasure. First of all, I want to say that the pandemic really accelerated the need for participants to exchange, because cultural practitioners were really alone and in dire circumstances. So within the project, we put even more effort into peer-to-peer exchange. And we were brought in to facilitate and guide this exchange and make it authentic, and also I would say support the self-organization of peer-to-peer exchange. A couple of principles that we used, well, I can say that we based our methodologies a large extent to action learning, and this means that you see the participant as leader of his or her own development. The participants are experts on their own situation. The approach is also that the participants are capable and willing to support someone else's development. So these are sort of the principles. We also use methodologies where finding and clarifying your personal values and driving forces. That's key if you're going to go into work with your business model or strategy, and clarifying this for yourself and for your team and peers. So you talked about the impact and why it's important. Well, many of the participants said that they actually used one word, and Jonathan and we have talked a lot about this, but they talked about trust. So enabling trust at the very beginning, you can then start to talk about your real issues, your shortcomings, the uncertainty. And that was sort of the basis for this. So why it is important, I think that it's about agency, that people feel that they are not receivers of external expertise, but actually leading their own development. That they have an experience and a methodology to be in support of someone else's development. This creates ownership of the issues at hand. It supports self-organization, which is vital for civil society, and in the wider sense, it's about strengthening our democratic system.
Thank you, Birgitta, for this insight. So we understand co-creation is not only a practice that is widespread in the arts and the culture sector. It has been used and theorized for a long time in a multiplicity of other sectors as well, including two sectors that are particularly important to DISCE: the cultural and creative industries sector, of course, and higher education. From what I understand too, there is not one co-creation method, but a multiplicity of them. So as an academic yourself and a believer in co-creation methods, Jonathan, could you please tell us what co-creation within DISCE has involved for you, why these approaches are useful for research in particular, and what, in your opinion, they have brought to the DISCE project as a whole?
Thanks, Tiffany. Absolutely. So, as you indicate, there are many different ways of doing co-creation, and there are many different things that can be co-created. So we can co-create a cultural program or cultural event, we can co-create knowledge, and we can co-create policy. And DISCE has been interested in all of those things. So just to give a summary of the spaces of co-creation across the project as a whole, we've had 4 big co-creation events, beginning in Dresden and ending in Bratislava. We've had the peer-to-peer learning between members of the Trans-Europe HALS network during the pandemic. We've also had co-creation as part of the data collection as well within asset-based community development workshops, and then at the end with some policy workshops as well. So lots of different ways of doing co-creation. And for me, co-creation has been a thread running through the project, through the co-creation labs, through the data collection. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. So in the 3rd co-creation lab, which was based in Ebeltoft in Denmark, but was largely online, we did a futuring exercise. So we invited participants to imagine what a inclusive and sustainable version of the creative economy in their city would look like in 2030. So this is a very particular mode of co-creation, looking to the future. And the themes that came out of that were really fascinating and really resonated with parts of the data that we were hearing in the 10 case study cities. So for example, the idea that in looking to the future, we should create a framework for getting there, but without over-determining it, without over-planning, so that the community is part of the developmental process. So this is strongly inclusive in the DISCE sense, and also an emphasis on recognizing what's already within the creative economy. So DISCE has this focus on ecologies, ecosystems, all of the different interconnecting parts of the creative economy beyond the creative industries themselves. And that came out strongly in this futuring exercise as well. And I'll just mention one other example, which came out of the peer-to-peer program that Birgitta mentioned, where cultural organizations within the Trans-Europe HALS network were supporting each other through the pandemic. And this theme of trust that Birgitta mentioned came out strongly. To get through this period, there was this emphasis on the need for building trusting relationships. So we picked up on that theme and took it to Bratislava for the next co-creation lab, and had a really fascinating conversation about trust between funders and organizations, trust between organizations and audiences, trust between politicians and the ecosystem as a whole. So that's just another kind of example of what co-creation has meant. And I think, just to sum up, I think all of these kinds of co-creation activities have both confirmed that what we're hearing in the data collection is playing out across a range of constituencies, and also confirmed that co-creation has a place not only within cultural production, as it were, but within research and potentially within policy making as well, as I think we'll go on to.
Thank you, Jonathan. So if I want to summarize what you both have just said, co-creation is a set of related approaches that reflects a number of values and principles that are widespread in the grassroots arts and culture sector, but which have proven important in other sectors as well, like the cultural and creative industries and within the academic research. At TEH, we have been using these methods for over 40 years. Co-creation approaches involve everything from peer-to-peer learning, asset-based and community-based research, futuring activities, etc., many of which have been used throughout the DISCE project. So I think we can talk about an exemplary set of methods when we talk about co-creation. And later in the day, we will be thinking further about policy, and a number of policy makers are here with us today. Could you please very briefly describe for us, Birgitta and Jonathan, how these co-creation principles and methods could also apply to policy-making processes. Birgitta?
Well, I can start. One thing that I noticed from working with people all across Europe here is that when they got a notion of here is a way where I can support others, where I not instinctively jump to telling others advice or here is how you should do it, but you help someone to reflect on their issues. They took that approach and that methodology into their teams, into their communities. It's not that difficult. So I think that is something we can think about when we think about co-creation of policies. So it spreads like you throw a stone in the water. It rings on the water, as we say.
Yes, thanks, Tiffany. I'll just mention 3 principles very, very briefly, which I think underpin successful co-creation and potentially apply to the policy-making process as well. The first is care. So care involves paying attention to people's needs, taking responsibility for meeting those needs, doing so with skill, and then being responsive to whether those needs are being met. So I think that underpins effective co-creation, but could also be potentially part of the policy-making process as a key value, a key principle. Some of us within DISCE have been researching care in relation to the creative economy, which the pandemic has only made more urgent as an issue. How do we care for each other? How do policymakers care for the constituencies that they work with? So I think care is a key co-creation principle that can be applied to policy, and we'll say a bit more about that later on today. And then trust, that we've already spoken about, which is closely connected to care. Meeting people's needs caringly is the foundation for trust, people being able to have firm belief in the reliability of someone or something. And again, trusting our policymakers is key, particularly if we're taking an inclusive, participatory, deliberative approach to policy making, and particularly if we're taking this ecological approach to the creative economy, whereby we're thinking really broadly about the communities involved. And then thirdly and finally, care, trust, and I think hope is also a bridge between co-creation and the policy process potentially, in the sense that hope is about being able to imagine some version of the future that is positive but uncertain. And I think effective co-creation can give people that opportunity to imagine futures that they want for themselves. And I think the policy process, if done inclusively, can also create conditions for that kind of futuring and hopeful, forward-looking kind of interaction as well. So those would be my 3 principles within co-creation that could potentially inform policy processes too.
Care, trust, and hope. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you very much, Birgitta. Thank you.
All over Europe, they are searching to bring together a creative and a cultural workforce for a sustainable future.
When we make an event in public space, we are inviting people to be together, to be in community.
And we started building a method how to engage children in collaboration with people who are doing puppet theater there. The children with the proper guidance were very, very creative.
We use cultural ecology to refer to the overall condition of interconnectivity between cultural resources, interdependence between cultural resources through which culture happens. But within the overall cultural ecology, there are many different ecosystems.
To be inclusive means to consider culture and creativity as a source of health and well-being improvement.
We tried to have a performance on the very first day. Theaters could open according to the state measures, just to say that we are here and we will keep strong and we will stand by whoever tries to keep the arts alive.
We had artists from the USA and a Greek Cypriot artist based in the USA who could perform from there, and we could live stream this, then followed with an online discussion.
The topic of developing inclusive and sustainable creative economies is one of the main topics of my existence as an artist.
It builds bridges between work, life, culture, and plays an active role in its neighborhood.
So building in social and environmental impacts into the work of our companies at a business level. So thinking about people, planet and profit together.
This co-creation lab actually was extremely enriching as a person and as a civil servant. We discussed about inclusivity, about sustainability, about cultural and creative industries.
So how can we give everyone more access to cultural activities?
A project like this one is absolutely needed and necessary because new types of experiences are raising not only in Italy but all over Europe.
The availability of the arts to people, they have to be accessible. And in order for them to be accessible, artists have to be able to create, but they also have to be able to take and give out there their work.